Picture this: the single most critical oil corridor on the planet, a ribbon of ocean barely 20 miles wide at its narrowest choke point, has been sealed shut. Dozens of merchant vessels are ablaze, their hulls torn open by shrapnel and fire. The gargantuan tankers that normally ferry 1/5 of the entire global oil supply have ceased their rhythmic transit, frozen in place by sheer terror and tactical necessity. And the weapon inflicting this monumental damage is not a flotilla of destroyers or a curtain of ballistic munitions. It is speedboats. Small, agile, fiberglass craft packed to the gunnels with high explosives and launched in the pitch black of night from concealed ports carved into a hostile and rugged coastline. That is the stark, unnerving reality confronting United States forces inside the Strait of Hormuz at this very moment, in what is unequivocally one of the most unconventional and asymmetrical naval confrontations witnessed in modern military history. And the response to that maritime nightmare has materialized in the silhouette of two warplanes that most casual observers would never have anticipated seeing dominate a contested waterway in this era. One is a rotary wing hunter that has been stalking armored columns since the frostiest days of the Cold War. The other is a fixed-wing attack jet so venerable that its maiden flight predates the birth certificates of many of the aviators currently strapped into its cockpit. Yet together, the heavy attack helicopter and the close air support turbofan are achieving a level of tactical success that squadrons of billion-dollar stealth interceptors and entire carrier strike formations have found elusive. They are methodically dismantling the stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz, neutralizing the threat posed by swarms of fast inshore attack craft, one kinetic engagement at a time. To comprehend the magnitude of what is unfolding within that narrow stretch of saltwater and why it holds the potential to upend global energy futures, ignite a ground incursion on a strategic Iranian island, and potentially define the culminating phase of this sweeping military campaign requires a return to the initial hours of the conflict. The narrative of how these two aging yet lethal platforms found themselves hunting speedboats in the sweltering haze of the Persian Gulf is, in many respects, the narrative of the larger operation itself. In the final days of February, the United States, in coordination with allied forces, initiated what defense analysts are already characterizing as the most consequential American military endeavor in the Middle East since the opening salvos of the Iraq War over 2 decades prior. The campaign, designated as a major contingency operation by the relevant combatant command, commenced with a synchronized avalanche of precision strikes. These initial volleys were aimed squarely at dismantling the adversary's long-range strike infrastructure, its clandestine nuclear development sites, the leadership cadres of its expeditionary paramilitary forces, and its conventional naval capabilities, all compressed into the ferocious opening hours of a single moonless night. The executive order authorizing the strikes was delivered via an 8-minute video address posted to a social media platform in the early hours of the morning, a uniquely modern dispatch for an ancient form of statecraft. The campaign was launched absent a formal legislative declaration of war, though the requisite notifications to the legislative security apparatus and key leadership committees were duly executed within the legally mandated windows. From the initial salvos, the campaign adhered to a specific and ruthless strategic calculus. The adversary's capacity to project chaos across the region rested upon several distinct pillars: a vast arsenal of ballistic projectiles, a maturing nuclear program, a network of proxy militias spanning the Levant and the Arabian Peninsula, and crucially, the enduring ability to shut the Strait of Hormuz on a whim. The first 3 pillars were addressed immediately with the kind of long-range, standoff precision fires that represent the apex of American military dominance. Cruise munitions roared from vertical launch cells aboard destroyers and submarines hidden beneath the waves. Precision-guided gravity bombs, immense in their destructive yield, fell silently from the internal bays of long-range penetrating bombers. According to defense leadership statements released in the weeks that followed, coalition forces successfully serviced more than 10,000 distinct aim points in less than a single lunar cycle. The industrial capacity to manufacture ballistic projectiles was functionally erased, rendered inoperable by repeated deep penetrator strikes. Hardened subterranean complexes were breached. The integrated air defense picture across the southern coastal approaches was methodically shattered into isolated, incoherent noise. Within the first week, military leadership confirmed that localized air dominance had been established over the southern flank of the contested coastline, with assessments from independent research institutes suggesting that upwards of 85% of the advanced air defense network had been rendered permanently offline within the initial 3 weeks of combat operations. However, the fourth pillar, the control of the Strait of Hormuz itself, presented a problem of an entirely different character and complexity. This is where the operational calculus deviated sharply from the standard playbook of aerial bombardment. The adversary has never possessed the capacity to challenge a modern blue water navy in a symmetrical line-of-battle engagement. That is not a matter of speculation. It is a grim and immutable fact of tonnage, technology, and training. By the middle weeks of the campaign, open-source intelligence and official disclosures indicated that a substantial portion of the opposing naval fleet, encompassing major surface combatants, specialized mine-laying platforms, and at least one subsurface asset, had been sent to the seabed. An unusual drone and rotary wing carrier converted from a commercial container hull and designed to launch loitering munitions from open waters was struck and neutralized within the opening hours. A newer frigate was reportedly engaged by a subsurface-launched heavy torpedo and now rests on the floor of the Indian Ocean, far from home waters. The conventional naval order of battle was being systematically dismantled piece by piece. What remained in the inventory, and what had been curated for decades specifically for this precise asymmetric scenario, was the unconventional threat. And inside the confined, shallow, and congested waters of the strait, that threat is built upon a triad of asymmetric disruption, fast attack craft, maritime mines, and one-way aerial systems. In concert, these three weapon systems have accomplished something that a line of frigates and destroyers never could. They have effectively imposed a rolling, violent blockade on one of the most economically vital arteries of global civilization. Reports from international broadcasters and defense media indicate that scores of commercial vessels were struck in the opening month of the conflict. Central Command disclosures noted that by the midpoint of the campaign, coalition maritime and air assets had engaged and eliminated over 100 hostile small craft and dozens of mine-laying vessels. Financial press reporting described the waterway as having ground to a virtual standstill regarding normal commercial traffic. Vessels flying the flags of nations not aligned against the coalition, or those with pre-existing political arrangements, continued to transit. But the flow of Western-flagged commercial tonnage, the lifeblood of the global energy market, had effectively ceased. The resumption of a voyage by a single European-flagged tanker became a noteworthy event simply because of its sheer improbability. The knock-on economic consequences were swift and punishing. Energy futures spiked by over 40% from the moment the first bombs fell. Think tank analysis calculated that the financial outlay for the operation had surged into the tens of billions of dollars within just the initial fortnight. And beyond the direct ledger of defense expenditures, there looms the staggering macroeconomic weight of the strait itself. Connecting the vast hydrocarbon reservoirs of the Gulf Basin with the open expanses of the Arabian Sea and beyond, this waterway normally accommodates roughly 1/5 of all crude oil produced on the planet, alongside a commensurate share of the world's liquefied natural gas shipments. Every barrel of exported crude from the major Gulf producers, and normally from the adversary itself, must transit this 20-mile-wide choke point. Sever that artery, and the global economic system suffers a massive coronary event. The regime understands this calculus intimately. The ability to disrupt the strait is the regime's most potent economic cudgel, and it has wielded that cudgel with significant, if brutal, efficacy. This raises the defining operational question confronting military planners as the campaign transitioned into its second and third weeks. How does one reopen a waterway that has been deliberately transformed into a sprawling, chaotic kill zone, dominated by swarms of explosive-laden craft operating from a coastline that stretches for over 1,000 miles of coves, inlets, and concealed harbors? The answer, confirmed publicly in a press briefing by the senior military leadership, rested upon two platforms that certain corners of the defense bureaucracy had been actively debating retiring from the inventory for years. The heavy attack helicopter and the close air support jet were now fully committed to the fight across the southern flank, tasked explicitly with hunting and eliminating fast attack watercraft within the Strait of Hormuz. The briefing also confirmed that the rotary wing assets, operated by coalition forces and regional partner nations, were patrolling the coastal periphery and being utilized not only for surface vessel engagement, but also for the interception of the one-way attack drones that had been saturating airfields, energy nodes, and forward operating bases across the region. That announcement marked a definitive shift in the campaign's operational character. Consider first the rotary wing platform, the venerable attack helicopter. Having entered service in the final decade of the Cold War, it is currently operated by a wide array of allied and partner nations globally. That longevity is not a bureaucratic accident or a product of inertia. It is a testament to a specific and lethal combination of attributes that no other vertical lift airframe quite replicates. It carries a family of guided munitions renowned for traveling at high velocity and delivering devastating kinetic impact, precisely the kind of ordnance required to reliably strike small, highly maneuverable surface targets. It mounts a chain-driven cannon slung beneath its fuselage, capable of spitting out hundreds of rounds per minute of high-explosive dual-purpose ordnance. A mere 1-second burst delivers enough lead and fragmentation to unstitch the hull of an explosive-laden speedboat or obliterate a low-flying drone in a heartbeat. Beyond its primary anti-armor armament, the platform can be configured with a suite of air-to-air heat-seeking interceptors and specialized radiation-homing munitions, granting it a credible defensive posture against aerial threats should the need arise. It also boasts a comprehensive suite of self-protection electronics, including active jammers, infrared countermeasure emitters, and chaff dispensers, rendering it a lethal battlefield node even before it triggers the first weapon release. The platform's cruising velocity is more than sufficient to overhaul the swiftest surface craft fielded by the adversary. Moreover, its sensor array, a fusion of mass-mounted millimeter wave acquisition radar, high-fidelity thermal optics, and laser designation systems, allows it to detect and classify inbound drones, small surface contacts, and other low observable threats at significant standoff ranges. In effect, it acts as a mobile, elevated early warning and battle management node for the broader air power architecture blanketing the strait. Critically, the helicopter is an environment-hugging machine. It is designed to fly down in the clutter, skimming the wave tops at altitudes where the adversary's small boat tactics are most effective. There is no sanctuary in the maritime weeds when the hunter is already down there in the weeds with the prey. Combat footage that has filtered out from regional partners operating the same airframe corroborates this capability. The imagery depicts the view through the aircraft's sensor turret as it locks onto incoming one-way attack drones and dispatches them with short, controlled bursts from the chain gun. Multiple targets are eradicated in rapid sequence. The method is efficient and brutally effective. A fraction of a second of trigger pull and a drone representing a non-trivial investment in adversary industrial capacity simply evaporates. There is also a lesser discussed but tactically significant munition option, the non-explosive kinetic projectile. These are rockets that destroy their target through sheer impact energy rather than chemical detonation. While this might seem counterintuitive against a hardened target, in the context of intercepting relatively fragile, unarmored drones, it is a genuine operational asset. A solid kinetic penetrator does not require a proximity fuse or an explosive warhead to bring down a flying bomb. It merely requires an intercept. This translates into a substantial logistical advantage during a high-tempo campaign where sortie rates are punishing, and the supply chain for specialized guided munitions is under constant strain. Every drone downed by a kinetic dart is one less guided missile expended from the finite inventory. Now consider the fixed-wing element of this duo, an aircraft that has been the subject of more retirement debates and congressional reprieves than perhaps any other airframe in the modern inventory. If there has ever been a combat aircraft that seemed purpose-designed by some clairvoyant engineer for a specific, narrow moment in history, this campaign may well be that moment. This close air support platform was conceived during the height of Cold War tensions for a singular, grim mission, the destruction of massed armored formations pouring through a European frontier. It was quite literally built around its weapon system, a massive rotary cannon of such immense proportions that the standard aphorism among aviators is that the aircraft is not a jet with a gun attached, but rather a gun with a jet attached. This 7-barrel hydraulic cannon fires dense, high-velocity penetrator rounds at a cyclic rate approaching 4,000 rounds per minute. At a standard operational firing rate, the sound it generates is an unmistakable, deep, and guttural mechanical roar that is instantly identifiable in any combat recording. Beyond the cannon, the jet carries a selection of optically guided and laser-homing surface attack munitions, as well as a pod of precision-guided folding fin rockets, optimized for low collateral damage engagements in complex terrain. For self-defense, it carries a pair of heat-seeking interceptors. Imagery released by the Combatant Command confirmed these aircraft configured for combat patrols over the strait, with mixed payloads that included both the guided rockets and the larger surface attack missiles, weapons optimized for the precise range of surface targets they have been ordered to engage. What renders this airframe particularly suitable for the Hormuz environment, however, is not merely the breadth of its arsenal, but its fundamental flight characteristics. It possesses the ability to fly low and slow over a congested waterway, where the visual distinction between a neutral merchant dhow and an adversary fast attack craft carrying a payload of high explosives is a matter of life and death for thousands of sailors and billions of dollars in cargo. High-performance strike fighters, for all their speed and sensor sophistication, suffer a critical disadvantage at low altitude. They move too fast to reliably interrogate ambiguous surface radar contacts, and their weapon employment profiles are frequently optimized for the standoff engagement of large, clearly defined, and positively identified fixed installations. The close air support jet, by contrast, can establish a low-altitude orbit over a designated kill box for an extended duration. This loiter time grants the pilot, whose eyeballs remain the most sophisticated sensor in the battle space, the temporal bandwidth to visually acquire a contact, assess its behavior pattern, confirm its hostile intent through electro-optical magnification, and then engage with surgical precision. According to defense analysis publications, this capacity for loiter and the platform's inherent aptitude for engaging dispersed, mobile, and fleeting threats is the precise attribute that renders it operationally irreplaceable in the current fight. Analysts describe this function as acting as a tactical kill chain stabilizer within a fragmented and contested battle space, where targets appear and disappear rapidly. Communications links are under constant electronic assault, and the margin for a fatal misidentification is razor thin. The platform's reputation for survivability is also of direct relevance in the strait environment. Its pilot is encased in a bathtub of titanium armor. The flight control systems are redundant and physically separated, with manual reversion capability for the critical surfaces. It is designed to absorb punishing ground fire, specifically the high-explosive incendiary rounds fired from shoulder-launched air defense systems, which remain the single most credible residual threat to low-flying aircraft, now that the bulk of the integrated strategic air defense network has been methodically erased. The airframe was designed to take a hit, lose hydraulic pressure, shed pieces of wing and tail, and still bring its pilot home. That design philosophy, often derided as anachronistic in an era of stealth and sensor fusion, is paying tangible dividends over the contested waters in the present day. The jet brings one additional capability that the rotary wing platform, for all its agility, does not inherently possess in the same measure. Its precision-guided munitions and heavier air-to-surface missiles possess the standoff range and warhead weight necessary to strike hardened point targets along the coastline itself. Launch sites, concealed storage depots, coastal defense artillery batteries, and command bunkers carved into the rocky shore. Where the helicopter is ideally suited for the fluid hunt of mobile surface contacts already in the water, the fixed-wing asset can reach back and suppress or destroy the very infrastructure that spawns and sustains those maritime threats. Together, the two platforms establish a layered, persistent, and mutually reinforcing aerial architecture over and around the waterway. One layer stalks the adversary's maritime assets at sea level. The other reaches inland to cauterize the sources of those assets before they can even shove off from the beach. This layered approach is precisely what the defense leadership described publicly. The confirmation of both platforms' involvement was not a casual aside or a mere administrative update. It was a deliberate and calculated signal that the United States was applying persistent, tailored, and multi-axis firepower to a specific, vexing tactical problem. Yet there is an added dimension of historical and bureaucratic significance to the fixed-wing asset's presence. This is an airframe that certain factions within the service bureaucracy have been actively seeking to divest for years, citing fiscal constraints and a shifting strategic focus toward high-end peer competition. Budget documentation called for the entire remaining fleet to be phased out within a handful of years. The active inventory had already been reduced substantially from its post-Cold War peak. Vocal advocates for the platform, including decorated combat veterans who survived catastrophic battle damage in earlier Middle Eastern wars, have long argued that the future battle space would remain a messy and unpredictable place. They contended that while the jet was never designed to penetrate the most advanced integrated air defense systems, the specific breed of close, persistent, and loitering firepower it provides would inevitably be required again. The current operational reality has emphatically vindicated that argument. Then, in the early days of April, the stakes were brutally underlined in a different and more visceral way. As the campaign entered its 6th week, one of these close air support jets, operating in direct support of a combat search and rescue mission in the vicinity of the strait, was struck by hostile fire. According to reporting from specialized aviation outlets and confirmed by official sources, the pilot managed to wrestle the damaged and faltering aircraft into the sovereign airspace of a neighboring allied nation before ejecting. A successful rescue operation was executed. The adversary released imagery purporting to show the engagement, claiming a successful intercept using a surface-to-air system. The incident occurred on the same day that a high-performance strike fighter was also lost over hostile territory. Its pilot recovered, but the rear seat weapon systems officer unaccounted for. These are the grim, inescapable operational costs of conducting sustained combat operations in a contested environment, even one in which the adversary's strategic air defense architecture has been largely dismantled. What remained of the air defense network, isolated launchers operating autonomously, decoupled from centralized command and control, along with a proliferation of man-portable infrared missiles, was still demonstrably capable of exacting a price. The close air support jet, for all its legendary armor and redundant systems, is not invulnerable to a proximity-fused, high-explosive warhead. This moment serves to underscore the genuine complexity and inherent risk of what coalition aircrews are being asked to do in and around the strait on a daily basis. This is not a permissive low-risk patrol. It is a sustained, high-tempo combat campaign conducted in the face of a dispersed and determined asymmetric threat. That said, it must also be clearly stated what the loss of a single aircraft does not signify. It does not signal that the platforms are being driven from the fight. It does not indicate that the adversary has reestablished any meaningful degree of control over the airspace. And it most certainly does not mean that the broader campaign to reopen the waterway is faltering. What it means is that war is an inherently dangerous and costly enterprise, and that the aviators operating over the strait are doing so under genuine and persistent threat of death or capture, in service of a strategic objective that extends far beyond the metal of the airframes themselves. That objective, the full and unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to unimpeded maritime commerce, extends well beyond the tactical engagements occurring just above the waterline. The deployment of rotary wing and close air support platforms to the strait is not occurring in a vacuum. It is unfolding concurrently with one of the most substantial and rapid movements of ground combat forces to the Middle Eastern theater witnessed in more than a generation. When one overlays the geography of that force disposition with the stated strategic objectives, a compelling and potentially ominous picture begins to emerge. In the middle weeks of the campaign, coalition forces executed what was described as one of the most intense and concentrated bombing raids in recent memory against a small coral reef island located a mere 15 to 20 miles off the southwestern coast of the adversary. This island, a flat speck of land barely 5 miles across, is not just another piece of real estate. It is the economic aorta of the regime. The island serves as the primary export terminal for somewhere between 90 and 95% of all crude oil produced by that nation. It hosts massive energy infrastructure complexes, including a state-owned oil company facility that alone pumps 500,000 barrels of crude per day through its pipelines, which snake beneath the seabed to connect the island directly to the mainland's largest oil and gas fields. According to detailed reporting on the attack, over 90 military sites on the island were struck. These targets included naval mine storage bunkers, anti-ship missile storage depots, the island's airfield and its associated support structures, and a network of radar and air defense installations. Critically and conspicuously, the vast and sprawling oil terminal infrastructure itself was deliberately left untouched. The executive leadership announced the strikes with a clear and unambiguous warning appended. If the strait was not immediately reopened and the attacks on neutral shipping did not cease, the decision to spare the energy infrastructure would be revisited with extreme prejudice. The warning was later amplified, stating that absent a diplomatic resolution, the war could culminate with the systematic destruction of the nation's entire power generation generation grid, its inland oil wells, the terminal infrastructure on the island, and potentially its desalination plants, the very sources of potable water for the coastal population. The message was delivered with the clarity of a kinetic strike. The oil terminal is being held as a strategic hostage, a final and devastating lever of coercive economic pressure.